So, can you hear me okay? Welcome to everyone. We are very excited to welcome you to this very first, first All About Alliance webinar, where we'll be exploring together the why of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before, and we have some help from Maria in that. But before handing over to Maria, I just want to say a little bit as to the All Aboard Alliance and who we are. Many of you here obviously know us, but we work together to have a sustainable, forward-looking, and innovative maritime industry that we can all be proud of, and both at sea and on shore. But just a little bit of background. So how we are set up is that we bring industry leaders together to drive action towards making the industry more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive, and build this sense of belonging that we would like to see to be able to both attract and retain talent. The whole alliance is set up around 5 core principles for driving this change. And as you can see to the right of the screen, we have sort of these 5 principles address all of the aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we perceive as the most important ways in which to drive progress. So where the first principle focuses on accountability, both within each company, but also collectively between us as member companies. It's about training and education, building the skills necessary. In the second principle, the third principle is about how to develop an inclusive culture. The fourth principle is about how can we work together to capture the necessary data that are needed to drive progress. And finally, how can we become more how can we communicate more and stronger about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion? So this is how we work together. It is set up as a platform for industry-wide action, and we take action by working together on identifying challenges, but also working together to find the best possible solutions. Next slide, please, Christian. And the reason why we set up these webinars is that based on the learnings from the last All Aboard Alliance Insights, which looking into how are we doing with each of the 5 principles, we sort of discovered a need for maybe facilitating more conversations around the why, the now, and the how. So we're setting up this webinar series. This is the very first one where we're looking into the why. The next webinar is on May 29th, where we set out to sort of explore and have a conversation around what can we do both individually as company, but also collectively as an alliance, to understand where are we now? What is the data telling us, and which indicators do we need and can help us develop the necessary transparency? And finally, on June 26th, we have the third webinar in this series where we are looking together to discuss and explore how can we make this happen? How can we work together on defining what success looks like, and how can we achieve the strategic impact that we're looking to achieve? So all of this points towards how we can work together, but obviously looking to explore the why together, both on a company level and of course also on an industry level. And to say maybe a little bit first about how we work both within Global Maritime Forum and also within how do we drive action as Global Maritime Forum and within the All Aboard Alliance. And we do that through what we sort of like to think of as multi-stakeholder engagement, and setting up ambitious coalitions of the willing amongst those that are willing to invest a little bit more than maybe everyone else. And we do that through, we have a process in 5 steps. So the first step is we do a lot of scanning, a little bit today, for instance, where we work together on identifying what are the challenges and problems that we need to address, and that can only be addressed collectively and not necessarily individually. The second step is then once we have identified problems that we need and want to address together, then we define, sort of collect data so that our work is evidence-based to explore the problem and identify what could be the most reliable indicators that could help us drive transparency and action. Once we then have that knowledge into what we aim to do, then we work together to co-design possible solutions, sort of engaging and involving with the most relevant stakeholders that can help us define and design the best possible solutions. And once we have developed those solutions, then we set up pilots that can sort of explore real-time learning together by figuring out these solutions, do they actually work, and how can we make them work better together, and how can we learn together. And finally, once we know which solutions work the best, we aim to set better standards. So we implement solutions into policy frameworks. And this is, of course, also what we want to do on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is very much about how can we do that together. So the way that we aim to do this is in this webinar is, of course, to explore the 2 most important questions of the why, and how can we facilitate better conversation as to why is diversity, equity, and inclusion so important. The first questions will be addressed shortly by Maria, and the second questions will explore together what is the importance of transparency in driving the necessary change, and why should we work together on driving this transparency. So looking very much forward to exploring these 2 questions today. And now then I'll hand over to Dr. Maria. Now I'm trying to pronounce your name correctly, Prokulaki.
Yes, that's right.
We had the pleasure of Maria doing a session or chat room in Athens last year, and we now on a slightly different but yet also similar discussion and a topic of belonging. But handing over to you, and look very much forward to hearing your take as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging are so important for the maritime industry.
Thank you, Suzanne, for the invitation. I will start sharing my screen here. Okay, confirm, you can see it?
Yes.
Good, great, super. So I'm building on top of what you mentioned earlier on the work of the All Aboard project and on the efforts of all the shipping companies towards this direction. Today I will give you some arguments on why to pursue diversity and inclusion in shipping. Diversity is a fact, and since we are in the global maritime industry, I don't see why we should ignore or avoid it, except for the fear of what lies under the carpet. The arrows in between the words indicate the connection and the transition also, but this is something that we'll explain on the go. So seen from a human resource management perspective and the recruitment strategies, the promotion of DEIB is both a quantity and a quality game. In terms of quantity, it is a matter of supply and demand of labor. If we focus especially on the seagoing personnel's labor market, there is a great shortage, which is expected to increase radically as the world fleet is growing, and there are other factors influencing the shortage. And we see a scarcity in general of people going at sea. At first, we have the need to fill in the numbers for safe manning, and of course to hire for the job, hire for the specific ranks and positions. I'm taking the example of seagoing personnel because it is very much easy to relate to and understand the concept behind. Generally, this quantity need directs companies to widen their scope of resourcing. They extend to more labor supplying countries. They explore and invest in emerging labor supplying countries, and also broaden their selection criteria to include, for instance, women that are underrepresented in the world statistics. It is also a quality game, as based on the recruitment strategy of hiring for the future, a question mark: what is the future of shipping? We expect technologically advanced vessels, a lot more, new trade routes, different conditions of working on board, also on shore. We see the need to focus on talent, to focus on skills, and also to see the potential of people. So the workforce of the future is what we currently have and what we are developing. As for the current workforce, we have to reevaluate our resources with a development focus, forward-looking management of the industry's human resources. I think, Suzanne, you mentioned it in other words, but we are on the same page here, forward-looking. We have to open our eyes and see the potential of people without being biased by the stereotypes we as individuals, but also the industry, still holds towards women, nationalities, and so forth. So diverse workforce is a fact. It is also a choice. And we know that with actions that support the inclusion, the equity and belonging, companies, organizations can gain the benefits of this choice. The organizations that embrace diversity hiring at first benefit from a larger talent pool than those who don't. I think this is one of the major benefits. By leaving behind our stereotypes, we can be attractive as companies to more employees. And with the growth mindset I mentioned earlier, we can actually take initiative and work with the potential of people in order to develop the future workforce. I'm also a big fan of stretch goals. So while giving opportunities to people is fair, it is at the same time a stretch goal for the organizations to build their management skills. For the homogeneous, let's say, workforce, the existing workforce, to enrich their skill sets by working in a diverse environment, and for the diverse workforce to reach their full potential. We know that the combination also of different experiences, working styles, cultural background, all these sparks new ideas and collaboration. So diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging provide multiple perspectives on problem solving, decision making, innovation. I very often say that problems are the same, but solutions might differ. And also note that employees who feel that they are accepted and are appreciated for who they are happier. And happy staff is more productive, less likely to leave the company. This seems obvious and is similar to why diversity hiring leads back to a larger talent pool. The slide shows several of the benefits. I will also emphasize that if your brand is known for diversity, it will become more appealing to many different customers, candidates, and potential business partners. So this can have an effect in the company's performance outcomes. Okay, so diversity is generally positively associated with higher productivity, quality of the service of the product, economic benefits. It's not what I claim, it's what the research shows. There are numerous studies in this field all around the world. I just picked some hints for you for the discussion part. Quite recent from McKinsey, companies with high numbers of ethnic and cultural diversity in their executive teams scored 36 so have a 36% more likelihood to have above average profitability compared to the companies in the bottom. S&Q Global, companies with higher levels of, again, gender diversity on board of directors had higher returns on equity, lower volatility, better stock price performance. BCG, two studies, companies with above average diversity on their management teams, again, reported innovation revenue 19% higher, and generally revenue can rise up to 19% in those organizations who have a strong tie to DEI. And there is more from Deloitte as well. The companies who are labeled as inclusive and who manage talent and diverse talent are quite exceptional businesses. You can see the numbers, you can see the figures. In short, these companies are not just better in HR, at HR. They are higher performing companies measured by business, financial, and talent outcomes. And you might yet say that what is happening in other industries, based on the data that these studies are retrieving, all this information, but what is happening in other industries or other parts of the world is not how shipping works. I agree, there are specificities of the shipping industry globally, nationally, regionally, per segment, indeed, but you are making history as we speak. Now, this industry is in transition mode, and what we see from research in other industries will be your story in the next couple of years. And there are some examples. We get already indications, for instance, of the relation of women on the board of directors and relation to share price performance. So there is already some evidence. Now we'll refer to this chart that depicts what we are talking about. It is from the Guide for Inclusive Leaders back in 2006. The key message here of this guide was that diversity is the mix and inclusiveness is the lever. Many organizations focus on attracting a diverse group of employees, but then they struggle with retaining the right talent. So organizations with a high diverse workforce that don't pay attention to an inclusive environment are likely to be more dysfunctional than organizations without a diverse staff. So we have to do it right. Research suggests that the answer lies not so much in policies and procedures as in the mindset of the leaders, who are there to create a culture that is inclusive. So the chart pretty much shows the relationship between diversity and inclusion. The upper left quadrant shows high diversity but low inclusion. This is when we just pick diverse workforce to tick the tick box. The lower left quadrant represents low diversity and low inclusion. The bottom right shows high inclusion but low diversity. And number D shows high inclusion and high diversity. And this is where we want to go. Organizations that practice inclusion as well as diversity are able to experience high levels of collaboration, engagement, retention, and therefore provide a competitive advantage. And the role of leaders is crucial in driving performance in a globally diverse and inclusive environment. Now, whatever your choice is, as of now, towards diversity and inclusion, bear in mind the business and economic imperatives of not pursuing diversity and inclusion programs, because discrimination and poor diversity management pose an economic cost. Again, I'm using data from the Diversity Research Network and the Center for Creative Leadership. They are rather old data, but I think they pass on the message that, for instance, the average equal employment opportunity complaint cost for an organization can be 1/4 of a billion. Workforce attrition rate, it's the opposite of retention. So how much, what is the percentage of people leaving the company, can reach up to 40%. And this actually affects the turnover costs. And turnover costs include expenses related to the recruitment, onboarding, training, lost productivity during the transition period. It can disrupt team dynamics. It can affect the morality of the remaining employees. So we know that there is a lost productivity attributed to the poor diversity management. So I summarize on the right. Legal settlements, yes, companies that fail to address discrimination, harassment, bias in the workplace may face lawsuits from employees or even regulatory agencies. And these lawsuits can result in costly, time-consuming legal settlements, fines, legal fees. I will name a few examples. Like back in 2018, Oracle Corporation paid 2 million in back wages and 2 million in interest to settle claims, allegations for pay discrimination related to gender and ethnic groups. Tesla, there was a lawsuit of failing to address a hostile work environment and discrimination. Uber, Google also has faced criticism, legal challenges related to diversity and inclusion practices like systemic gender pay discrimination. They also paid 2.6 million to settle the claims. Even in shipping, we have a case of 2 lawsuits of female cadets alleged that the shipping giant did not have safeguards in place to protect them on board, and that the company fostered a culture where sexual assault, harassment were not taken seriously, resulting to alleged rape. The lawsuit was actually recently settled. But let's not take the bad scenario, and you won't be the bad scenario. You will take the right direction. From my experience, both as an academic and as a consultant, I have to share that we often talk with shipping companies who share their worry about the atmosphere, about the perceptions, and about what is actually going on towards and among diverse workforce. And sometimes they are even afraid to ask, even anonymously, being afraid of the answers. I would like to shed light here. Let's hear all these voices, thoughts, assumptions of people in shipping who are asked to promote, to take a step and support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yes, it's not a charity. No, it is a smart business choice. Thank you for acknowledging the historical inequalities, and note that this is a matter of having access to opportunities and being supported, not hindered, not a boycott, no, without a boycottage, in order to deliver the work. The second is about compliance. It's not about ticking the box. It's not about showing that a company is politically correct. It's not about making the numbers look good. If it is done for compliance, the results may be different from what is expected. And the workforce can understand the fake. And the existing workforce can become hostile to the company and to the marginalized, diverse workforce. It is hard in practice, yes. It's not an easy pathway, as every change of culture and mindset is not easy. Saying you're committed but not buying into the steps it takes to change will not take you far. When you actually start changing the policy and trying diversity inclusion progress and pushing it to budgets, and then you will, and in practice, you will realize that to some, fairness feels unfair. Because when someone is privileged, fairness feels like getting less. But that's only the perception, as shifts happen within a company committing to greater fairness and balance. It is hard in the beginning, but you have to stay consistent. Tape is not, DEIB is not for the ships. Seamen, and I use the term seamen instead of seafarers, often say that the only female at sea is she, referring to the vessel. Although I like the tradition behind, let's get serious. DEIB is not giving performance numbers quickly, but it does. We have to be patient, we have to be consistent, and focus on the inclusion and equity actions that will enable people to collaborate and to thrive. It's not a current fashion. If you see it like this, bear in mind that this is part of the future in shipping. This is what we're talking now about the future. There are pitfalls of staying behind in this evolution. And it takes time, it takes money, yes, as every change that is now taking place, that it occurs in the industry, in any industry, business sector, and company. So the why, I will use some of the statements of the All Aboard. I fully subscribe. The why serves not as an endpoint, but an important conversation to be conducted within organizations and the industry. It is not a generic message to be rolled out, but an exploration to be pursued. So it is your choice to target, to attract, to recruit diverse workforce, but just picking diverse workforce, diverse people, won't give you more value than the tick box. Inclusion is a choice to welcome the diverse thoughts, the ideas, the perspectives, and it occurs when people don't need to consider filtering parts of their personal identity out of their professional profile, persona. Belonging is a feeling. It is a sense of fitting in, but not because you squeeze yourself to fit, to match the company, but actually because the company culture is open enough to embrace each one's elements of difference, the seen and unseen elements of difference. So belonging is a feeling that you are an integral part of the organization, that you contribute to the team and to the organization. Are we playing with words and acronyms? No, I'm just showing you that it is not just a tick box exercise. It is a journey of change, changing the mindset, and requires consistency in the action taking and devotion. It is about ongoing diversity efforts to reflect, to develop a new perspective in order to achieve the change in people's attitudes. Also, to eliminate biases, conscious, unconscious, stereotypes that affect productivity and communication within the company, and to operate in a coherent manner, smoothly. We want the multiple voices to be encouraged and to provide this out-of-the-box thinking in order to foster creativity. And this will increase the company's productivity. And what binds all these efforts is that belonging actually creates conditions of psychological safety, which is a shared belief held by the members of the team that everyone is free to speak up without being embarrassed, rejected, or punished. So a lack of psychological safety at work has risks when people don't feel comfortable and safe There is this dangerous silence, as we call it. The seafarers also may feel uncomfortable talking about the possible errors in the system, may lack initiatives, not just seafarers, also onshore. Generally, when people are not fully committed, the organization will lose the opportunity to leverage the strength, the value of all its talent. And I'm sharing here a figure from the work of the Academy of Innovation HR that shows how these concepts are connected. And here, the role of leaders is crucial. It's a game changer in the efforts towards creating conditions of psychological safety. And the growth mindset, the focus on development. This mindset is what we're looking for. And as a closing remark, we all hold many different identities. And because of this, we are who we are. We function in our workplace. It is rather narrow-minded that one identity defines a person. We obviously have to take a better look, talk, connect to people, and keep this growth mindset, keep this development focus in mind. Growth mindsets are the ones that lead us to the future of managing companies and, of course, the human resources. Thank you for your time. And of course, I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think we will take questions at the end. But thank you so much for this, really valuable, and we'll find a way to share as much of your points as possible afterwards. But and allow me to build a bit on what you shared here, because the purpose and the focus of the All Aboard Alliance is, of course, making sure that we support each and every member company on their journey in defining a strong why that appeals to the future and existing employees, the future and existing customers and stakeholders and shareholders, etc. And then we also have a strong focus on what can we do to work across the broader industry, learning within the alliance from each other, and then develop a strong and shared collective why as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so incredibly important. And when we initially set up the alliance in 2022, we had these three needs that we were sort of focusing in on an industry level, but they tie very well with what you just shared now. But the first big need in and across the industry is, of course, what can we do to address the global talent shortage? And as you, Marie, explained, well, if we are good at attracting more than just one particular type of employees, we get access to a much larger pool of talent. And it helps us in attracting more people and also being able to retain if we are good at including and providing fair and equitable conditions for everyone to work and thrive. Then there is also a very strong need for us as an industry to meet the expectations from industry stakeholders. We are seeing, I'm constantly using the example of IKEA because they've been sort of more forceful in promoting this. They are now increasingly asking the carriers that they're using for shipping. 98% of their of IKEA furniture is transported by sea. And they are now starting to take a strong interest in is there diversity, equity, and inclusion on board the vessels that are being used to transport their goods. So we need to be able to meet those expectations, not just by responding to the asks from IKEA, but to develop our own practices that will make IKEA comfortable in choosing the right carriers for or sort of owners and operators to ship their goods, but also increasingly from stakeholders, policymakers, educators, sort of in and across the maritime value chain. We see policy sort of regulators that in the EU, at the IMO, increasingly expecting us to do better. And then finally, as Maria also stressed, this need for innovation, we need that within the company at a company level. We definitely also need that as an industry. We are facing the decarbonization, digitalization, automation. We need people to think in multiple different ways to be able to understand problems from different perspectives and be able to address them differently. And for us to do that, we need to become much better at attracting and retaining a broader pool of talent. And this was also very much addressed in our first high-level meeting in 2022, where we looked into what are the big whys that we are trying to address as the All Aboard Alliance. And we worked with these, what we called 4 urgent action areas. We really wanted, and that was back in 22, and this is still very much relevant today, that we need to become much more creative in how we design our jobs, how we make a career in maritime more attractive overall. We're not just competing with each other within the industry, we're competing with other industries and sectors. And we need to benefit from all of the work on sustainability that is already taking place to develop a much more attractive value proposition for people to be able to think about maritime as a possible career path and find ways to work together to make it overall more attractive. We also need to become better at improving overall diversity. When we look at leadership, whether that's board of directors or executive management, we still see a lot of homogeneity, as Maria also said. What can we do together as the Alliance and on an industry level to improve overall diversity in leadership? That is a big why that we need and can address together. There's also the gender imbalance at sea, which is a huge challenge. We need to, of course, focus much more broadly on diversity, not just being about women and men and gender. We need to broaden it, but the sort of the need to urgently address the gender imbalance made it as an urgent action area. And we can also see across companies that this is also one of the areas, together with the improving diversity in leadership, areas that attract a lot of attention and that we can benefit from a more collective approach towards that. And finally, a big sort of important why that we need and can sort of address together is finding ways to ensure a better accountability towards diversity, equity, and inclusion by formulating clearer targets, but also finding ways to shine a light a little bit in the dark to better understand where are we now. These are some of the things that we'll also be exploring in the next webinar at the end of May. And then how can we address this or sort of work with this why, or continuously build a stronger collective why? This was a transformation map that we started working on in May 2022. As an alliance, we are continuously working on building a stronger and collective why for all of us. And we do that by obviously sort of exploring and identifying new collective challenges and problems, constantly scanning to see what is out there that needs our attention. Currently, we are working on setting up, for instance, a severity scale for better understanding the severity of sexual misconduct at sea, so that we can develop collective ways of sanctioning what is acceptable, what is not acceptable behavior, and could we develop an industry, a sort of collective industry approach for how each of the sort of the incidents that could be categorized as sexual misconduct could be appropriately sanctioned as and within the industry. Then sort of we also spent or tried to focus and work together to collect data to explore and identify reliable indicator. And what is a reliable indicator? Which is oftentimes very difficult when dealing with the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if we think back to the presentation by Maria, with belonging being the desired outcome, this is what we are aiming to achieve, and how can we then in a reliable way measure belonging as at an industry level, and how can we work together on finding out what are the reliable indicators that can help us drive progress across the industry, and equally important, to co-design possible solutions that will help us address the challenges that are being experienced across the industry, and then set up and sort of pilots where we identify ways in which these challenges could be addressed, and then test them out and try them out in for real, like with the severity scale for sexual misconduct. Once it's been decided, we will test it out in at least 30 different pilot vessels to make sure that it actually works the way that we want it to. And then at the end, or the purpose of this is, of course, how can we work together to set better standards for how to create an environment, for instance, on board a vessel that is psychologically safe? And for us to do that, we need to be able to understand fully through data what that means and how that can be achieved. And then we can push for legislation. So as, for instance, the next amendment of the MLC 2006, could we potentially be able to develop some recommendations that could be used for the next amendment? And then an example of how we address the why is the work stream that some of you have been involved in, which is focused on improving diversity at sea and making a career at sea more attractive and inclusion and inclusive, not just to the standard seafarer, if such a profile exists, but to women and to everyone who might have an interest in pursuing a career at sea. So there was a problem clearly established at the 2022 high-level meeting. We then went ahead with defining how we could, what can we do to find out what the challenges are for women at sea. We identified 15 pain points that you can see on the left on the screen here. We then worked together with at least 20 companies and a lot of different experts to co-design solutions to each of these, and they are now being piloted on board 12 vessels. I was just sailing on board one of them last week from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore, and really seeing how the solutions that we developed together are being applied and used on board. We're collecting data on a daily basis to understand how are the solutions working, and hopefully at the end of the pilot later this year, we will be able to share some very concrete recommendations as to how do you make sort of a vessel and the conditions on board more inclusive, not just to women, but everyone wanting to be there and attractive, and set and define better standards for doing exactly that. So that's an example of how we would like to work together within the Alliance, and hopefully with many of you to continue addressing the most important challenges and find out how we can develop better standards that are more ambitious than minimum standards that are defined by the MLC at sea, for instance. How can we work together on defining what does inclusive and attractive look like in a company, in an office, for instance, and not just on board a vessel. But it's not just about sort of setting up and defining the why. It's also the value of transparency, when really finding out, when we know what the problems are and we can speak to them more openly, we are able to develop and progress. We have this strong quote from Forbes: with progress with DI is not linear, and transparency is critical to aligning on areas of improvement, building shared understanding of what it takes to make progress, and prioritize accountability, which is very much what we aim to achieve. And we cannot not do this. It's not an option. If we want to retain our license to operate as an industry, we really need to do so much better on this, which is also why we need to set up these highly ambitious coalitions of the willing, that are willing to be a little bit more transparent than everyone else, and learn and use this transparency to learn from each other, and share better practices, but also the practices that are not really working. We're already doing that somewhat within the Alliance. We are sort of within the next few weeks be able to share the second edition of our annual insights, where every member company is submitting their existing practices across the 5 principles, and then by making them sort of themselves vulnerable, every member company, by sharing what is difficult and what is seemingly working well, we can we can work together on learning faster and building stronger practices, and really find ways to also push on everyone else who's not necessarily a member of the Alliance, but to do much better as well. And there have not been very strong traditions for openly sharing within the industry, because to many it's been sort of perceived as a little bit of a risk. And we have this sort of, if we go on our own and share what is difficult and what we're doing on DEI, especially in the current climate, it might feel risky. But if we do it together as an alliance, what we may end up doing and what we may sort of be able to achieve is actually setting better standards for what does good look like, what does it mean to be an inclusive and equitable and sort of diverse company and industry, where everyone feels that they can belong and where they will want to stay in order to fulfill their ambitions and dreams. So that is very much what we see the why as, but we are of course very curious to hear any questions, comments as to the whys, to either Maria or myself, as to sort of the why is very different, most likely for different companies. Some will focus on the business case, other will focus on because it has to be like that, others will focus again on the need to be fair. There is no right and wrong, just multiple opportunities for defining a why that fits with each particular company, which also makes it a bit more difficult. But this is also why we see a need to facilitate the conversation. Maybe Christian, are there any questions that you can share?
Sorry, yes. We have 2 questions at least. Apologies, there have been issues with the Q&A function. So if you have submitted there, we might not be able to see it. So apologies for that. Should you have anything, I posted my email in the chat, and you can always send it to us that way. But we do have 2 questions. One in the chat here is, what exactly do you mean by transparency? Should companies be publishing their numbers publicly, in terms of how transparent do we actually need to be and how nitty-gritty, or do we talk transparency in actions or so?
Thank you, Chris. Do you want to go first, Maria, on this, or?
Well, transparency in different interpretations here. Within the All Aboard Alliance, I think that it is all about sharing what works and what doesn't work. We shouldn't be shy. I mean, everyone has experiences, difficulties, and very often they are quite similar. So sharing, opening up, and finding common solutions. I think it's, for me at least, this is the value of transparency. It's also part of the work ethics, which should drive how this industry works, whether we're talking about shipping companies or all other organizations. So transparency is not to be feared, but rather it's a tool to do better. Now, especially for companies which are in stock exchange markets, I think they already have some obligations towards publishing numbers, but numbers is one side of this diversity, inclusion, belonging. They don't describe the why, they don't reflect the how. So this is how I would answer this question.
Thank you, Maria, and I can only concur. It is and can be about numbers, but more importantly, it is about what we're aiming to achieve and how we do that, and what seems to be working well in doing it, and the difference between what we can do on a company level and then what can be done on an industry level. And we've been using a little bit within the Alliance's terminology of we all work together on raising the tide of talent. If we sort of all help out in developing new talent at sea, it might be adding extra training berths, for instance, on shore. It might be about taking on as many interns as possible from some of the better academic institutions, etc. Everything we invest in raising the tide of talent can make the industry more attractive going forward. And every time we treat people poorly, we lower the tide of talent. So working together on learning quickly, how do we raise the tide of talent and how do we avoid lowering the tide of talent for the maritime industry?
Yes, and good ideas and talent is welcomed from wherever it comes. We are in this stage that we are and should be open and openly discuss and hear all these diverse workforce that is looking to work in the industry but is hindered.
Exactly, and some of is there? We have another question as well, or Christian?
We had one coming in around the Zoom setup. Great, thanks for two good presentations. First and foremost, thanks for that. The question are, in advocating for DE&B across various global contexts, how can we effectively navigate and advocate for these principles in regions where certain identities or expressions, such as homosexuality, are illegal? So how do we ensure fair treatment of employees across global organizations with regional frames of differences?
Can I go first, Maria, and then so I think on the topic of, for instance, homosexuality or areas in which it is more difficult to navigate, we need to sort of just as with everything else, try to avoid aiming for a one-size-fits-all model that will work for everyone. So by exploring what might work in one area and learning quickly from that can be applied and used in other areas, but that we really also, in developing the expertise within diversity and inclusion, that we also refrain from thinking that there is one right way of doing inclusive leadership or building inclusive cultures. There are multiple ways. And for instance, when it comes to providing openness around and making it possible for people to be open about their sexuality in a collective or in a context where that is illegal, is increasingly is an incredibly complex issue, but we should not refrain from addressing it. We should just avoid trying to think that we can develop one approach that will work in every different context. Sorry, that was not a very elaborate answer, but hopefully, Maria, you can do a bit better on that.
Well, I'm thinking that awareness and training and getting to know the aspects of the different identities and the different diversity elements is critical at this point, because we are not mature enough probably yet to look ahead and take the step, a longer step. So small steps to get to know each other, get to know what it is all about, so that we become able to manage and to allow for people from with different diverse elements to work in conditions that support them. This is how I see it, and I'm going back to this patchwork of identities. It's not, demographics very often stick to the labels, huh? But we are more than just one identity, for sure. So get to know about these elements, and then, of course, get to know the person.
And then I guess much of this is also about, exactly as you say, being curious about each other, but also spending time on avoiding a particular type of homogeneity. So on board sort of a vessel, trying to avoid having sort of a large majority of one particular culture, one particular gender, one particular sort of makes it easier to have those conversations. If we are all the same, we probably make it's more difficult to address the different weaves of the different elements of we're all different. There isn't, you're not either diverse or homogeneous. It all depends on who we are engaging with and the context.
I think it's a matter of how evident or not the diverse elements are, like gender or age. You can understand more easily, or color, compared to sexual orientation or hobbies or other stuff. So I think it's back to the individuals if they want to share it. And the companies, of course, to realize what I said earlier. It's not just one identity. That's why I really hate the statistics, because they don't reveal the whole picture. And this leads to poor decision making. So small steps: become aware, become comfortable and open to start discussing and hearing, and then we can continue with the next actions.
And I think it's defining a strong why. Why is it that we want diversity? Why do we want inclusion? Why do we want equity? And why do we want people to feel a strong sense of belonging? Once we've answered those questions, it becomes easier to argue for this is an investment we make in building for the future generations also.
Exactly.
And so having the conversation about the why, it's not that once it's written down, it's done. It's a conversation that needs to be had constantly and aligning across the company, across the alliance, across the industry on why is it that we want to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive, and what can we do to get there, which is also then what we'll be sort of exploring further in the next 2 webinars as to where are we now, not necessarily focusing only on the numbers, but also the processes that will help us understand what needs to happen and the gap between where we are and where we would like to be.
Yes, absolutely agree. At the industry level, indeed, but also at the individual level. So reflection on where we are and what biases we hold. I think it's a good step as well to consider.
Thank you so much. That was a good concluding remark, I think. Thank you so much, Maria, for being with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. We look forward to hopefully seeing you again at our next webinar, which is on May, is it 27th, Christian? And we will follow up with you after the webinar. But thank you so much for joining us. May 29th. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Salud.